Hello, Dr. Lee. This is Austin Polich. This is my report for Engineering 354 Soil Foundations, and the topic that I am exploring today is the New Orleans levee failure. This is an area of interest for me because not only am I studying civil engineering, but I also want to move to the South after I graduate, and they're known to have a lot of hurricanes there. For these reasons, along with a few others, that's why I decided to research this topic. And it's essentially, in short, it's a geotechnical engineering failure that when a hurricane hit, it could have saved many more lives. The American Society of Civil Engineers, or ASCE for short, they recognize these levee failures among the top engineering failures of all time. And it was actually the Army Corps of Engineers themselves who were responsible for building these levees. And what was so significant about these failures is that they didn't properly follow their own rules when they designed this project. Hurricane Katrina, it hit New Orleans in late August of 2005. And these levees, they were meant to prevent flooding from such hurricanes. But when they were built, the levees were built, they were already full of water before the storm hit. And the Mississippi River Gulf outlet levees, they were overtopped before the storm, in addition to other nearby parts of where the storm hit. And it essentially could have been designed better and saved more lives. In total, there were over 1,100 lives lost. And not only that, but I mean, it's an expensive failure. So, looking at it as engineers, how are we expected to do better? And while there's a point to be made that a hurricane did all this damage and it killed all those people, a huge loss could have been prevented if the Army Corps they did what calculations were necessary and they actually did their job correctly. They used flawed data. They failed to speed up construction of the levees. It wasn't done in the first place, and it didn't. They didn't consider the natural sinking of the land. There were many ways which some aspects of this could have been prevented, and that's kind of what I'm going to do in this presentation. The New Orleans levee failures, they're noted among the top engineering failures of all time, and it's not because there was such a casualty loss. In addition to 134,000 housing units suffering damage, 124,000 lives lost, or the 100 to 150 billion dollars in damages, the worst thing was that it was all from the Army Corps of Engineers, the engineers who were supposed to be the top of the top. And so the Army Corps of Engineers, or the USACE, they've been serving the United States of America since its near foundation, from constructing shelters to wars to building bridges that are driven daily throughout the USA. The USACE has had a tremendous impact on the growth of our country. And to be a part of this, you have to be one of the best engineers in the country. However, when these levee failures hit, there was a new perspective that was overcast to these once mighty and respected Army Corps of Engineers. Let's take a look back roughly 60 years. The USACE, it was authorized to complete hurricane protection system for the region in 1965. However, due to delays in budget cuts, only 60 to 90% of the project was completed. And the incompletion of this project factored greatly into the destruction of the New Orleans levees, along with its levee failures. The handling of the situation was so bad, actually, that the Federal Emergency Management System, or FEMS for short, the director, Michael Brown, he had resigned due to the handling of the issue. But it wasn't all the USACE's fault. Sorry about that. It wasn't the USACE's fault because another reason was the geographic layout. The geographic layout, it wasn't already in the best position. It bordered two main lakes and a river. These were Lake Pontchartrain and Lake Borgne, and also the Mississippi River. And the soil, for the most part, was soft and malleable. Not to mention the humidity probably didn't help with the water air to air ratio. So this is this picture in the background right here. It's kind of a bad picture, but this is generally what the layout looks like. You can see Lake Borgne right here. This is New Orleans, and then we have the Mississippi River that runs along here, and then this is Lake Pontchartrain. Um, and so it's just surrounded by water. And so having a levee system in place was critical in order for hurricane prevention. So this was really important, and it was completely screwed up, which is why so many lives were lost. And that brings me into the ethics of this situation. Many suffering could have been avoided given that the engineers did their job correctly, thus making it an ethical dilemma. And the tasks given to the USACE were to build flood prevention systems, and it failed. So flooding reached cities covering up to 80% of some, which is about 6 to 10 feet deep. There were three types of flood protection structures built by the USACE. These were the eye walls, T walls, and levees. While much can be accounted for as far as the structural aspect goes, the geotechnical aspect of these structures was most critical. Making sure that the eye walls and the T walls were placed in solid ground was important so that they don't fall over. Also, in addition to this, where the walls were placed, so the location of the walls, that was important too, because it determined their effectiveness for the building that they were designed to protect. Obviously, if an eye wall is placed at the base of a city, let's say it's on a hill leading up to it, it will have minimal effect on prevention of a possible flood. However, if it's placed at level or higher ground, it could be more effective. In the industrial canal, 4 eye walls were reached before the water even overtopped them. So that's just saying a little bit about how these were put into place. The 17th Street Canal is a perfect example of what happens when the soil types are not accounted for, this specific breach. At the time of the failure of the wall, the water level was 5 feet lower than the top of the wall, and that's when it failed. So how does something like this happen? Well, the problem was that the levee and the flood wall, they were built over soft soil, and it was a thin layer of marsh followed by clay. And what happened in the end was that the eye wall slid out from underneath the canal from the pressure of the wall. The resisting forces weren't greater than the driving forces in this case, and the factor of safety was 1.3, which was another component which resulted in the failure. Typically, a higher factor of safety might be chosen. And so 1.3 is typically low in today's standards. So that's one of the other problems that the Army Corps of Engineers could have fixed from the start. In another scenario, the eye wall and the levee, they were built on top of mainly marsh and sand, excluding the layer in between, and the design allowed for seepage of water straight through to the sand on the other side of the levee. And this could have been prevented by creating a water-filled gap, which allows for an uplift force, which must be smaller without a water-filled gap. Failures like these they contributed to the bowl effect, which is where water pools up in a city, and flooding essentially. The variability factor or step size, it was also greatly exaggerated. For areas of geographic variability, such as New Orleans, the data must be carefully collected with much smaller step sizes to collect the information. So there's a lot of different things that they could have done. So how do we prevent this, something like this? Well, in short, they could have been prevented if the project was already completed. At the time of the hurricane, the project was about 60 to 90% complete, and it should have been completed years ago. In addition to this, the factor of safety could have been a lot higher. The city layout could have been considered by the transportation engineers within civil engineering, and given its placement next to the lakes, the 2 lakes, and the Mississippi River. The levee fill with the eye wall should have been more carefully reviewed, as the sand below was too loose, which caused the eye beams to either be lifted or snap way before the water even reached the top. There are multiple ways that one can see a relation to God in this scenario. First, as engineers, we're called to give our best effort in all that we do. For bridges, they collapse, levees fail, mechanisms break, and people die if it's not done correctly. So this is a parallel of how we're called to give our all in our walk with Christ. And if we don't outreach to others, their souls are lost and God wants them to be saved. So in addition to living up to all that we're being called to be, this situation relates to God in the sense that there's a profound loss of life. We grieve and mourn for the loss of life because we weren't designed to die. God designed us in the garden. He didn't want us to perish. And so the amount of lives lost during this horrible catastrophe just begs the question, did many of these people know Jesus? And if not, what's something that we can do as evangelicals going forward to ensure that people who may be at risk of dying know Jesus? So there were many things that I learned throughout my research of this engineering catastrophe. For one, I realized that people can be careless of their jobs, and it's important, especially as engineers, that we have a passion for what we do. I also learned that placement of cities and their proximities to large bodies of water matter, especially in areas of high storm probability. Levees and storm protection systems must be especially inspected because of the frequencies of storms that may pass through. I also learned that catastrophic events such as this one not only affect the immediate community, but it also affects taxpayers everywhere. In the following decade, actually, more than $20 billion have been spent to prevent the next major flood. So that's a lot of money to consider. And this also affects people's mental health. Much of the population, they moved out permanently because of this catastrophe. And many people were left homeless. So that just takes a toll on people's minds. But in the end, this is a call to higher standards. It's a call to awareness of the situation. And most importantly, it's a wake-up call to Christians to make sure that they are evangelizing, because we don't know when the next catastrophe is going to happen. All the lives that were lost in New Orleans, they didn't know that they were going to die that day. So as Christians, we need to act like any day could be our last. We need to ensure that others know Christ too, because it's important that their souls are saved just as much as ours.